From the countless rumors that Chris Pratt was going to be the next Indiana Jones, to his sudden announcement that he'd never even consider it, the question of Harrison Ford's successor doesn't seem like it's gonna get answered anytime soon. But I guess we don't have to worry about that for now. The Dial of Destiny will bring Ford back for his 5th outing as the adventurer. What a ride it's been. Ford's been at it for like half a century at this point. I doubt any other actor has held on to their character for so long. And in a day and age where even someone like Henry Cavill can get shown the door, it wouldn't have been surprising if Ford got replaced as well. The great news is that he's gonna come back for one last adventure. Although that's definitely a bittersweet thing to hear, cause it's hard to imagine anyone else in the role. But Ford's just a human being at the end of the day. Even though he'd like to think otherwise, he's really getting on in years. The guy celebrated his 80th birthday just last year, so I have no clue how he managed to pull off yet another portrayal of his most iconic character. Regardless, there's just no way Ford will be able to come back for another movie. Although, based on what he said, it seems like he doesn't really want that himself. Harrison's made it pretty clear that the 5th Indiana Jones movie will be the end of the road for him. I certainly don't blame him for wanting to hang up the hat and whip. The guy's gotta retire sometime. He's had some fun returning to his famous roles. The Star Wars sequels gave him the chance to come back as Han Solo, allowing him to say goodbye to his second most famous character. And now it looks like he's gonna do the same with Indy. But this raises a few questions. Who could possibly step in to fill his shoes? I mean, Indiana Jones is a multi-billion-dollar franchise, and now that Disney owns the IP, they're not gonna want to let that go. So there's a good chance that the studio's gonna go out looking for a replacement. I don't envy them on that front, cause this is not the sort of decision they can make randomly. As it turns out, there's actually an actor out there who might be up to the task. Could Chris Pratt be our next Indiana Jones? It kinda makes sense if you think about it. Pratt has established himself as a legitimate leading man, thanks in large part to his amazing performance in Guardians of the Galaxy, and that makes him a decent choice for the next Indy in and of itself. But that's not all. He really seemed like he was the ideal candidate thanks to Jurassic World, mostly because of how he wrangled those dinos. It's easy to see how well he'd fit into the role, and Spielberg himself mentioned that he'd want Pratt to play a younger version of Indy. But if that's ever gonna happen, it'll have to be with Ford's blessing, and I have some bad news about that. Harrison Ford hates the thought of Pratt replacing him, and he hasn't been afraid to say that. When the rumors started circling that Pratt might be getting lined up for a sequel, Ford was quick to point something out. He is Indiana Jones. That's why he is willing to come back for a 5th movie, despite being about 20 years too old for it. In Pratt's defense, he only came in the line of fire because of the rumors. And what's more, Ford didn't technically mention Pratt. In the interview where he asserted his complete control over the role, he mentioned that Chris Pine will never get to replace him.
Now I've got it.
Yeah.
Harrison Ford.
This is a hell of a way to tell Chris Pines this. I'm sorry, man.
Well, you know, it's better that he hear it from you.
Say what now? Where did Chris Pine come into all of this? Well, it might have been a bit of a mix-up from the old-timer. I'm pretty sure he was referring to Chris Pratt, and it's not exactly his fault that there are so many Chris's in Hollywood. It's fair to assume that Pratt was the Chris on his mind, and if we can take his word for it, there's not an iceberg's chance in hell that Chris would even audition for the role, or anyone for that matter. Poor Chris Pine got done dirty for no reason, but in case he was even considering it, I have a feeling he won't be doing so anymore. So what does Pratt have to say about all this? Well, he seems to be taking Ford's comments pretty seriously. Chris Pratt won't touch the role with a 10-foot pole. Now, you've gotta understand, Harrison said what he said in strong terms. His exact words were, "I'm Indiana Jones. When I'm gone, he's gone. It's easy."
Indiana Jones.
So when you're gone, it's gone.
When I'm gone, he's gone. It's easy.
That doesn't leave much room for interpretation. It seems pretty definitive, actually. Ford's also a pretty scary guy by all accounts, so Pratt immediately said that he wouldn't dream of trying out for the role. In his own words, he doesn't want Harrison Ford's ghost to haunt him for such a big mistake. It's all in good humor, of course. Ford's a major player in Hollywood, but there's not much he can do if Disney decides to go with their golden boy. However, it would be a huge misstep if they end up moving ahead with it. Pratt would make a terrible Indiana Jones. I'm not saying he's a terrible actor, far from it. He does great when he plays to his strengths. It's just that those strengths are kinda limited. He almost always plays a lovable goofball. Say what you will about Indiana Jones, but neither of those terms apply to him. The guy's a gruff maverick, a rugged hero who never blinks in the face of danger. And Chris Pratt, he's a blinker, and he never hesitates to make fun of himself for it. I'd imagine he'd turn the whole role into a joke, and it won't be his fault either. He probably just won't be able to help it. Despite all of his adventurous characters, and regardless of how much Disney loves to bring him on for new roles, casting Pratt as Indiana Jones would be an outright disaster. It would ruin the franchise for all of the fans, and I doubt it would bring any new fans to the table. Besides, there's a good reason why The Dial of Destiny is the first Indiana Jones film in 15 years. Harrison Ford only agreed to return on one condition. The condition being that the movie had to be worth it. It had to be a great film that could stand on its own. Not to mention continuing the tradition of one of the most iconic characters of all time. So the filmmakers had their work cut out for them. They needed to come up with a story that Ford would approve of. That might be ironic, considering how bad Indiana Jones 4 was. But whether you liked it or not, Harrison sure did. Or he'd have just ignored the email asking him to come back. I feel like things would be the exact opposite with Chris Pratt. He's a nice dude, don't get me wrong, but he's also kind of a corporate shill. He seems like the kind of actor who would just shut up and do as he's told. And I shudder to think of what would happen to the franchise with someone like that in the lead role. The great thing about Harrison Ford is that he really cares about his characters. He doesn't just want to make money. He's already made more than he'll ever be able to spend. Instead, he wants to make sure that everyone that sees the film gets a good experience. And that's just one of the many things that make him the only Indiana Jones for me. Here's to hoping Disney doesn't try to replace the irreplaceable. That's all from me on why Harrison Ford didn't want Chris Pratt to play Indiana Jones.